She opened the door in silence, her eyes soft and knowing, as if she had been waiting just for me. As if the wind that had followed me in carried stories of all the nights I had dreamed of her before we ever touched, and though I had come only to fix the shelves that leaned crooked in her hallway, we both knew that nothing about that day would remain simple from the moment her hand brushed mine as she passed me the screwdriver. I knew that I was not just her handyman I was about to become. Her secret, her name was Elise, and she had a quiet sadness about her, a kind of beauty that had been earned, not gifted, the kind of woman who had learned to carry silence like armor. And yet with me she softened, she smiled, she laughed, and her eyes flickered with a heat that undid every word I meant to say. And when she asked if I could stay a little longer to help move some boxes from the garage, I did, and when we brushed shoulders in the narrow doorway and she didn't step back, I knew she felt it too, whatever this was, whatever danger it held. Days passed, and I found excuses to return even when there was nothing left to fix, and she never stopped me. She always offered me tea, always wore those soft cotton dresses that danced around her knees, and she always lingered just a little to close her voice. A little too gentle, until one afternoon when the sky was thick with rain and thunder shook the house, she kissed me in the kitchen, pressed her lips to mine with a hunger that had waited far too long, and I kissed her back like she was the only reason the world still spun. We met in secret after that, afternoons when she said she needed help, evenings when her daughter stayed late at school, moments stolen between shadows and sighs, and she told me that no one could know that this thing between us was fragile, beautiful, dangerous, and I believed her. I promised her I would stay hidden, I would stay hers and hers alone, but then her daughter came home early. One day I had never seen her before in the light, only in photos on the walls, smiling, young, radiant, full of mischief and fire. Her name was Lena, and she walked in with a boldness that filled the room, tossed her backpack on the couch, and looked at me with eyes that burned with recognition. Before Elise could speak, Lena smiled slowly like a secret unfolding and said, "So you're the man who keeps fixing things around?" Here her voice was laced with something I couldn't read. Curiosity, maybe amusement, maybe something else, and I nodded, unsure, suddenly very aware of how close Elise was standing to me, how charged the air had become. And Lena tilted her head just slightly, as if reading between breaths, and left the room with a smirk that haunted me long after she vanished down the hallway. As next time I came over, Elise was nervous, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress, her voice quieter than usual, and she said, "Lena knows something, I don't know what, but she's watching us." And I nodded, kissed her forehead, and promised again to be careful to be invisible to everyone except her. And for a while it worked, until the night Lena caught me in the backyard smoking a cigarette after Elise had fallen asleep, and she stepped into the moonlight. Barefoot hair, loose eyes, bright and unafraid, and she said, "You could have told me and I would have kept your secret." And I laughed softly, unsure what game this was, and she said, "I've seen the way you look at her, but I've also seen the way you look at me." And then she stepped closer, the space between us vanishing like fog in the sun, and I should have stepped back, I should have walked away. But her breath smelled like apples and rain, and her hand found mine like it belonged. There I told myself it meant nothing, that it was just tension, confusion, temptation, but the truth hung heavy between us, and soon I was caught in something bigger than promises and guilt. I was caught between two women who burned in different ways. Elise, with her gentle touches and silent pleas, Lena, with her fierce hunger and wicked smiles, and I kept trying to leave, but I never did, because every time I said, "This has to end," one of them would pull me back with a kiss, with a whisper, with the kind of look that made me forget who I even was before this began. One evening, the three of us sat at the same dinner table, the air so thick I could barely swallow, and Elise looked at me, then at Lena, and said softly, "Whatever this is, we need to stop it before someone gets hurt." And Lena only smirked, twirling her fork in her hand, and said, "Or we could stop pretending." And I saw it then, the fire in both of them, the wild thing that had pulled me in, and I realized I was never in control. I was not a man with a choice. I was a secret shared between them, a flame they both fed with every glance, every touch, every stolen moment. We never spoke of love. We never spoke of the future. We existed only in the now, in the heartbeat between risk and ruin. And maybe it was doomed, maybe it was madness, but every time Elise pressed her lips to mine, and every time Lena traced my jaw with her fingertips, I forgot what sanity looked like. I forgot what guilt tasted like. I only knew that I was theirs. I was always their sigh was Elise's secret until Lena made me hers too, and somewhere in the heat of it all, in the chaos and the want, I stopped trying to choose because sometimes what burns brightest is not meant to last and sometimes we don't need forever. We just need no on. Now was all we ever had. There were nights I lay awake, tangled between them, feeling Elise's breath on my chest while Lena's fingers trailed down my arm, and in those moments, I knew no one else in the world lived like this. No one else knew this strange, forbidden bliss. And yet, even as I held them, I felt time closing in like a storm waiting beyond the window. The kind of storm, will one day find its way inside, no matter how tightly you shut the doors. Elise began to drift into thought more often, her silences growing longer, her smiles laced with worry. She would touch my face like she was memorizing it, like she feared it might vanish. And one night she whispered, "I never meant for it to become this. I only wanted someone to see me again," and I held her tighter, but I had no words that could quiet the ache in her voice, no promise that would not feel like a lie. Lena, on the other hand, burned brighter each day. She didn't hide, she didn't question, she only wanted more of me. More hours, more touches. More of what we knew we shouldn't have, and sometimes I think she wanted to win, not because she loved me, but because she could, because she had always lived in her mother's shadow, and now she had taken something her mother once thought was only hers, and there was power in that for her, and maybe even for me. But love is not a game, and secrets are not forever. Happened one evening when I came over, and neither of them opened the door. Instead, it was unlocked, and the house was quiet. Too quiet, like it had already been emptied of its warmth, and I stepped inside, calling out to Elise, then to Lena. But there was no answer until I found them in the living room, both sitting across from each other like reflections in a mirror, both too calm, too still, and Elise looked up at me with eyes full of something final and said, "We can't do this anymore." Stood frozen between them like a statue carved out of guilt and desire, and Lena leaned back, arms crossed, jaw set, her voice flat and sharp, saying, "You knew this couldn't last, but you still let it." And I wanted to scream that it wasn't just me, that they had pulled me in just as much as I had fallen in, but the truth was clear on their faces. They had already decided. Elise stood and walked over to me, placed a kiss on my cheek, a soft farewell, and whispered, "I loved the way you made me feel, but I cannot lose her, not again, not like this." And I nodded, though my heart felt like it was breaking through my ribs, because I understood, because I had always known this moment would come, and still I had stayed. Lena walked past me, then pausing only to look into my eyes and say, "You could have been mine, if only you had chosen, but you didn't, and now neither of us gets to keep you." And I watched her walk away, the door closing behind her with the weight of goodbye, and Elise followed without a word, leaving me in the silence of a house that no longer wanted May. Stood there for what felt like hours, replaying every sea's eve, every moment, every laugh, every sigh, every night spent in a dream that could never survive the light of morning. And when I finally stepped outside, the sky had already turned to ash and gold, the sun bleeding into the horizon like something ending, like something beautiful refusing to fade quietly. Never saw them again. Never heard their voices or felt their skin or smelled their perfume on my clothes, but sometimes late at night, when the world is still and the past feels close, I close my eyes and I see them again. Elise with her sadness and her softness, Lena with her fire and her fearlessness, and I remember what it felt like to be theirs, to belong to something that was never truly mine. I was her secret until her daughter made me hers. Too, and for a time I lived in the space between them, where rules broke and hearts collided, and though it ended as all impossible things must, it was real, it was wild, and I will carry it forever in the quiet place where memory burns brightest and love dares not speak its name.